CCFD Tehsalida in the Asia
ขอบ
department.
ไงครับ
And one day I had a telephone call from the reception to say, Jaran is downstairs. What is Jaran doing downstairs? And it turns out, I didn't know this, that Jaran has a long history of a relationship with the CCFD, with Kathy, who was here just now. Yeah, so it's really a pleasure to see Jaran again, and even more importantly, to be able to give a little bit, the CCFD to support a little bit all our friends and comrades from Thailand who are not only refugees here in France, but in other countries. So it's a very small thing to be able to welcome you here today, but it's really lovely to see you. And also to see Lek again. I've known her even longer than I've known Jaran. She was one of the founding staff of Focus on the Global South back in 1995. Yeah, so Lek and I worked together for 3-4 years, I think. And then did a lot of activism together.
We met more in the demonstration.
Exactly, we met more in the demonstration. So it's wonderful to see Lek again.
12 minutes videos called, it's actually a long documentary films on Thai in exile. This is done by one of the early exiles, from the less majestic case in 2010. The team in the process of trying to actually reach out to all of the Thais who are in exile. They now cover in Asia. They try to come to Europe and try to come to the US, but because the people who are working on the films is also political refugees and have difficulties of obtaining visa to come here. So we hope that we can do something to help them to come to Europe and America to make this film complete. But and you will see. And so this is called Thai in exile. This is the result of my presentations in Stockholm University last week or last month. Basically, it's try to briefly introduce what is the root cause of the problem in Thailand. And many of the data I use in this study, which actually can find on the internet, not easy, but can find. And of course, you all know that this kind of presentation cannot do in Thailand. So today, as you see, this is a two circles in 2006 of the political deadlock in Thailand. Military coup, protest, new constitutions, elections, protest, military coup crackdowns. 2006 and then 2014. So we're going to go briefly, basically, because I think you can read through in paper. It's going to be circulated later about the root cause of confusions. We have Cold War propaganda, brainwashing, the crisis of the palace, and the issue of civil society, which might makes many of us uncomfortable, is something that have to be said, especially about the Thai civil society. I'd like to start to remind us that in 24 June 1932, there is I think there is a word, we even cannot use the word democracy revolutions. We use the word democratic coup d'etat because it's the attempt of changing the political system from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchies. And I start with these paragraphs. This is the first paragraph in the 1932 announcements of the of the People Party, and which I see that it is very relevant, into the current situation. The situation is the same, the succession of the brother of the King Rama VI, and this is currently the succession of the brother of King Rama VIII, and that is the start of maybe we focus on the confusion in Thailand. So I start these presentations focus mostly on the 70 years of King Rama IX. He was crowned in 1946. And I have done this paper in 2011 to try to mapping the death tolls of the people under the suppression of the Cold Wars and also under the jurisdiction jurisdiction killing under the policy of the government. And it's come out quite high, 11,000 people. And when I tried to check with the historian who was here, studied the Cold War period, and asked about the figures of how many people, is there any one record of the people who died during the Cold Wars? Eventually, in the name of killing communists is not a sin. He said no one record that. One thing is because the Communist Party of Thailand also doesn't want to show the loss of the lives of the people. And secondly, the government, the government during that time also doesn't want to show high record, to show the failure of the government during the communist fighting. But we have Ajahn Somsak here, he might have some information about it. But for me, I can't dig into the details of how many people died during that time. Propaganda is very strong. During the Cold Wars, the militaries and the palace and the support by the U.S. Army have boosted up a lot of propagandas, in the name of protect the monarchies and killing communists is not a sin. And Thai people believe with these propagandas from those period and until now. And this propaganda, like nations, in the name of nation, religion, and king, you see is show obvious all the time in the current military juntas. Or killing communists is not a sin coming from a Buddhist monk, who promote this propaganda during the 1970 crackdown on communists. And the Thai people in general, we are called subjects of the king, or not of the citizens of the country. And that verse has been boosted up all the time by when Thailand under the junta, military juntas. And since 2006, you can see that the love of the kings, banners and slogans. And when you meet foreigners everywhere, they will say, all the Thai love the kings. That is also the propaganda that has been built up, especially after the 2000s, the decades of 2000. Protect the king has been the propaganda that has been more and more increasing now under the military juntas. And even the student action last week have been facing with people coming to attack them. And cook for the kings. Under the current kings, we have 11 military coups in the name of get rid of the corruption politicians and ask the king to appoint the good people to rule the countries. And this propaganda, which is even though it's 30 years after the Cold War, is still very strong in Thailand now, especially since 2006, that military tried to bring this back in terms of using the already too much, brainwash 60, 70 citizens into protect the interests of the military.
Until yesterday.
This is because when we study about it, we always thinking about the education because Ministry of Education is the biggest state public state budget of Thailand. Is consume about nearly 20 to 30% of state budget. But why Thailand education failed? Why it go wrong? So I was so surprised that people don't see this information because Thailand is very quick to adopt international universal principle of human rights. And even before the child rights have been adopted by the UN in 1959. In 1955, during the negotiation, the Marshall people has already allocated people in Thailand to write songs about the child rights in 10 principles in accordance to the child rights principles and adopted the Children National Days since 1955. And what this song said is actually, when you look at this song, which is now popular every Children's Day, which is second Saturday of every January is our National Children's Day. This song is opening, until now. And then the activity of children's song is military camps throughout the country. Open the military camps for children to play with guns and to play with tanks and to see the military weapons. That is the activities we did. And because of this, we can look back into one of the universal human rights. Is that when the United Nations talking about child rights, children rights, the interpretations in Thailand is talking about the duty of the children. The song called The Duty of the Children. When the first principle of the UN said the right to equality without distinctions on account of race, religion, and or national origins, the first duty of Thais is belief in religions. It says, and you can see that that is how they be twisted on what everything. That is how even though we ratify Universal Declaration on Human Rights, but it's never been into practice. And Prayut, 3 months after Prayut junta, he come out with 12 principles for the education system to incorporate in the education system. Prayut gone very fast in the 12 principles, points of values, as he said. 4 of it is about honoring the kings, like protect national religions and the king, and understanding democracy with the king at the head of state as over there, and conscious practice of good deeds on the time, and as taught by His Majesty the King, and following the economic sufficiency economies of the kings. That is the 2014 junta, value, sense of value that has been collaborated into every education system in Thailand. Been questioning what's wrong with Thailand, because if you look at the yellow mobilization, yellow shirt, they always said bad politician. We have to do together because we have bad politicians, and kick out bad politicians for the good people. But if you look at the scene in the beginning of King Rama IX in 1946 until now, we have 26 prime ministers under one king, and on these 26 prime ministers, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8 บวก 5 เท่าไหร่วะ 8, 9, 10, 13 prime ministers coming from the military coup and appointed by the king after the military coups. So we left 14 prime ministers coming from the people vote. But the king appointed and the military coup leaders are taking 46 years of the 69 years of the king. Does it mean 65% of the king is ruled in collaboration with military dictatorship? And the lifelong of the elected prime minister is only 2 years, but the lifelong in the junta is 5 years. And so that is how that the loyalists and the people who are in Thailand, they lost because no one see, people don't look into the reality, and you get locked into personal conflict, and actually they create the figurehead of the Thaksin Shinawat, which is a business tycoon who turned into business, into politics, and very successful in both ways, and then to the king, dying kings with no good future, good king, to replace. So the Thailand were caught into two kind of like a conflict over the personal, but it actually is bigger than that. It's the elitist society institution that try to sustain their privileges. I said that the past 10 years in Thailand is not a war between the loyalists and the elite, but the war to access social welfare, because most of the people who are in the yellow shirts are the people with the state pensions, the government officers, the state employees, they are fully protected by social welfare. And many of the red shirts are the ordinary people who just thanks the Prime Minister Thaksin for approve this free care for all. That's the only first welfare that the Thai enjoy, and they start to realize that they have the right to access to social welfare. And this is the situation behind this current, political situation. I look at the Thailand because I think this also indicate the present. I said since 2010 that if Thailand sustain continuations of election for 2 terms, we will have future of democracies. So when we look at the elections in Thailand, the elections got in 1946, we have only one time in the history of 70 years that we have full-term prime minister from election without being kicked out by military junta. That is 2001 and 2005, which is Thaksin 1. But you see that during this, we are under the junta. The election was like 1 year gap, 2 year gap, and from 1957 to 1969, we never have elections. And then we have student uprising in 1974, and we have election 75, 5 years after that. And election in Thailand, you see that it's never been stable. Most of the ministers or prime minister or the cabinet have been forced to step down by military coups or by dissolutions of the cabinet. And since 2006, many of the cabinet have been forced by, not just by military coups, but by the independent institution which is called the Constitutional Court. In the Constitutional Court since 2006 had disposed three prime ministers. I mean, dissolved three political parties. The power of constitution over the electoral, and most of the constitution court judge are appointed by the 1940s, 2006 military junta. And this also show, because I didn't have time to talk in detail about the Democrat parties. Democrat Party is the only oldest party, which is the Loyalist Party, was formed in the early periods of the kings in order to protect the monarchist institutions. Democrat Party have history of using dirty games, political games, you know, to gain the power. Since 1992, Democrat Party never win any elections, but they push themselves into the political, running the governments, you know, in 1976 because of the 77 because of the crisis, and in 2008 because of the Constitution Court. And this is you see why the loyalists against the Chinawat party. We talk about Chinawat parties because there are three political parties under the management of the Chinawat families. And since they are coming to the politics, no one can beat them. Democrats cannot beat them. And Democrats know that they cannot win into elections to go through this process. And this is part of the political confusions in Thailand because the opposition parties, which has been the oldest, the biggest, and the longest connections, feel the need to use external force to put them into power. So why NGOs are participating in the loyalist movement? I'm getting hot now. Okay, because one thing by nature, many of the NGO leaders are the broken heart communists. They were many of them are the students who was joining the communists in the 1970s. When there is a pardon of the communists, the collapse of the CPT, Communist Party of Thailand, in 1979, you know, many of the NGOs or the students at that time, if they not go to study or become academic in the university, they join what we so-called rural development ideologies. They become an NGO and organize communities. After they break up from the communists, they cannot talk about political socialist ideology anymore. They only talk about the poor, solving the problem of the poor, and that makes them easily lost into the hands of self-sufficiency economy of the palace. And many of the old NGO now under the patronage of one of the figureheads of the palace as well. Another thing is that I think, as you know, Thaksin have rejected the idea of Thailand of being a poor country, and I think he said we don't need foreign aid anymore. And also, like Thailand has gone into the category of not need to receive foreign aid in 2000. So many of the NGO want to sustain their work. What they do, they go to seek funding support from what we call the National Health Promotions, which is it become the biggest umbrella funding agency in Thailand, with the money allocated from drugs, what you call liquor, you know, tax. From what you call that? Sin tax. Yeah. to stop people from smoking. And because of that, and we part of it, right? And then we refuse, and my organization refused to take money from this public health organization because you cannot touch the politics, you cannot use it for organize, you only use it to mobilize people, for the big good people, and mobilize people to support the monarchy, wearing yellow shirts and things like that. And that's how many NGOs mobilize people to support the loyalist movement. Okay. This is why the trade unions joining the loyalist movement in the beginning, I think it might be quite difficult to understand. But in later, because the trade union movement in Thailand until now is shamelessly very low, only 1.5% of the national 38 million population. And this is not because there is no attempt. My work for the past 20 years, actually 30 years, is coming to Europe and tell Nike, Reebok, Adidas, Michelin to stop violating labor rights in Thailand. You know, so the union busing is very strong, and that is a reason into that, because when the Labor Relations Act of Thailand is formed in 1975 in the midst of the Cold War propaganda, they have made it in such a way that it prevents the working class to form and join the union successfully. In the 1975 Labor Relations Act is that what we call non-contract workers cannot form and join the union. And civil servant cannot join the union, cannot form the union in that time. That means farmer, fisher folk, migrant worker cannot join the union. Only the industrial workers and state enterprise workers can join the union. So this kind of fight to lift this restriction is continued. I think in 2003, state employees, the civil servant can form and join the union only in 2003. But it was for a long time. And the farmers was channeled to form and join cooperative. This is under very strong control of Ministry of Agriculture. And that is why the union was very, very weak and very small. And in very big and very small, the biggest say of the union is the state enterprise. They control railways, they control electricity, water supplies. That's why even though they're small, they make a big noise during these past 10 years. Thai union is very much linked to global union. Global FEA, Swedish Labour Stiftung, opened the office in Thailand in 1975. All of the global unions, go to Thailand since 1970s to help the Thai to organize unions. And so why the Thai unions go wrong? And that we said, and this is also to prove that that the Thai union is not about I'm throwing blame to them, but we have the record of the Thai union participate and engage in the politics in Thailand for the past 10 years. And there are three consequences which indicate the big change during the past 10 years to Thailand is related to the Act of the Unions. In 18 September 2006, the unions and PAC mobilized, called for general strike on the 19th. On the 20th, they said they would call general strike to mobilize 30,000 people to kick out Thaksin. On 19 September 2006, military organized a coup in the name that to stop confrontation of the people on the street. And that is one thing. And then they are involved a lot. The unions participate in the occupying of the airport in 2008, and then return visit the Democrat Party into the government. And also when recently in the Yingluck government, in the 9 December 2013, the Yingluck had dissolved the cabinet. But before that, the union constantly, 8 December 2013, Serve Enterprise Union said that they will organize general strike to dispose Yingluck. And he decided to avoid confrontation, dissolve the cabinet, and acting as interim prime minister, which is not satisfaction. So the union continued to mobilize and boycott the February elections. And on 19 May 2014, Serve announced that they will organize another general strike to totally kick out the Yingluck from the interim prime minister. At that time, Yingluck, she already out by constitutional court, but her interim cabinet all have to be out. 22nd of May 2014, the Royal Thai Army organized a military coup. So you see that without the force of the union, the military won't have enough substance, reason to call on the military coup. That is one part. When you look at this part of it, but they may be asked, but union definitely, Thai union definitely have been used, and they are also know that they are part of the political confusion in Thailand. I think that is coming to an end, and then we can discuss. There is no other way. It's like the way forward. There is no other way than now the whole world have to recognize what's Thailand as it is, and then stop playing game with Thailand, and demand that Thailand is going to return or get back on the road of democracy as soon as possible. There is no other way than that. Because now, there's so many statistics for the past 10 years. Like after 1 year after the coup, now foreign direct investment has been diluted in 1 year, 97%. In figures show, and then we are now facing a boycott, and the EU live on the protest privileges. In 1 year, the sufferings and the story of people who suffer in Thailand is coming in every direction. And so what is Thai and international community should do now is stop playing game with the Thai junta and jointly demand that there is election to be organized. If it's not organized by the Thai junta, it has to be organized by the coalitions of the people in supervised of the international community.